What's up guys, I'm Jordan Needham, this is Jham 3D. Today I'm going to be showing you how to mask out areas of your object based on the XYZ axis in geometry nodes, and then you can control where these geometry node effects are being applied on your mesh. It's super cool, it's super useful. So I'm not going to be showing you how to do everything in this image, which is an image that I made. However, I am going to be showing you how I sort of controlled where these effects were applied to my mesh. And as a bonus tip, how to make a sort of Avengers-esque animated dissolve effect. So make sure you're in the geometry node tab of Blender. I am in Blender 3.3. This should work from 3.0 and up. Now I'm going to select the mesh that I want to apply my geometry nodes on, and make sure that you add a geometry node modifier. And let's go ahead and get this started. So this works on pretty much any mesh. I'm using a character because it's complex enough to kind of show where this effect is being applied to, but you can use any mesh with enough vertices, I believe. So if we want to make an effect and mask out where it's going to occur on our mesh, we actually have to first make an effect, of course. So let's do a simple sort of instance effect. So let's go Shift A and let's go instance on point. Shift A and let's go to search and distribute points on faces. Our mesh is still gone. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Shift A, mesh primitives. Let's go to icosphere, plug the mesh into the instance. Way too big, I know. Let's change the radius of this icosphere to 0.01. Okay, and now crank up the density on our distribute points on faces so we can actually see the outline of our object. All of our icospheres are the same size, not necessarily what we want. So to quickly change that, Shift A, add in a random value node, and let's plug the value into the scale. And let's change the minimum from 0 to something like 0.07. This is because if your value is literally 0, it means that it will, I mean, just think about this. If you scale an object down to 0, that means it doesn't exist anymore. And so when we have these instances and we scale them all the way down to 0, it kind of defeats the purpose sometimes of having an instance in the first place, because it just deletes it. So I want to salvage as many of these as I can, so I try to keep that in mind. Okay, so now we have our character turned into icospheres, but we want to control where this is occurring onto our character, and more specifically, we want to be able to control it based on the XYZ axis. So how could we do that? Like, say we only wanted it to happen on half of the character. How can we do that? Well, I'm gonna add in a Shift A, delete geometry node. Let's plug the group input into the geometry and the geometry into the group output. So now we deleted our entire mesh, which is not what we want to do. We want to control which part of the mesh we're deleting. So I'm going to add in a reroute node, Shift, right click, drag over this line right here. If you don't have Node Wrangler enabled, that's not going to work for you. We want to control where this geometry is being deleted from our mesh, and that's an easy thing to control actually. And that's the magic of today's video. So Shift A, and let's add in a separate XYZ, plug the, which axis do we want to use? Do we want to mask out the Y, the X, or the Z? I'm going to go based on height for now. So let's plug in the Z to our selection, and boom, it didn't do really anything. Why? Well, let's go ahead and control the Z value then. Oh, that doesn't work either. That's because this separate XYZ node, it has no input. It has no vector to go off of. So we're telling it separate XYZ. XYZ of what? Let's solve that problem. Let's go Shift A and add in an input, and let's add a position node. Plug the position into the vector. Oh, okay, now it just deleted everything. We want to actually keep some of our geometry. How do we control this? So Shift A, add in a math node, and change this from add to greater than. There we go. Now we're starting to see the power of this effect. And if we play with our threshold value, we can control which part of our mesh is being deleted. Okay, so now you might notice that this effect is only being applied in one direction. So from here, we're actually going from top to bottom. What if you want to go from bottom to top? Well, you can change this from greater than to less than. And you can see how that works. Now, what if you wanted to shave the ends off of your character? So you just want the middle of it. Let's Control Shift D to duplicate and remain connected to the Z axis. And let's change this bottom one to less than. Let's duplicate this math node and let's plug it in here. And let's change this to add. And let's plug the less than into the value. Okay, so nothing is happening. We need to control these values a little bit more. Let's change the threshold to what we're going for. So say I only want the core of this character. Let's see. So I got that on the top, and now let's do it on the bottom. Okay, and then let's add this in. And there we go. Now we are masking out the top and bottom of our character, and this is pretty sick. You can see how you can start to use this in a way that's very powerful. So if we wanted to use a different axis as well, let's say we use the Y axis, we're gonna actually obviously have to adjust these values, but I'm just gonna use 1 for now, as was seen in this image and this artwork that I created. This works on any axis, and that's really cool. And if you're having a problem, like say your Y axis is actually your X axis for some reason, that's because you need to click on your mesh and Control A and then apply rotation. I have a character rig which is rotated, and so if I do that, it's not really going to do anything. I don't want to get into that. Okay, so now we've deleted half of our character, but we don't have the effect or instance effect. So how do we add our instance effect? This is relatively easy, actually. Let's go Shift A, add in a join geometry node, plug the instance on points to the join geometry node, and boom. Except we have one problem. Our instance is everywhere. It's still being applied to our entire mesh. And that's because there's nothing telling it to stop. There's nothing telling it where to start or where to stop. It's just doing the whole thing. Now, if you go to our instance on points node, you can see there is also a selection input. And that's great because that means we can actually use the greater than, or whatever we're using to control where our geometry is being deleted. We can use this value and plug it into our selection. And there we go. Just like that. Now you're controlling two things at once. So you're controlling where an object is being deleted, and once it's deleted, we're replacing it with icospheres. Super cool. Now this works on a bunch of different things, so don't think like you just have to use these particular effects or anything. I'm just trying to show you to get a better understanding of how you can mask your object out based on the XYZ axis. So let's animate this effect really quick because I think this is kind of cool. I don't need these nodes. You might, but I don't. I'm just gonna clean this up a little bit. And let's change this window to timeline. Let's go to frame 1. And on this greater than, I want to start out where it's not affecting the mesh at all. Which looks like it's between 0.3 and 0.4. So let's go 0.35. 0.35 it looks like it is. Unless it's, okay, so 0.37. Okay, the reason that I dialed that in is because if you animate this and your value is too far, basically for frames, it won't do anything for as many frames until the threshold reaches your mesh. Right click on this and insert a keyframe. And then let's go to frame 60. And let's complete our transition by dragging this threshold down. Kaboom. Add that in. And now if we go back to frame 1 and press spacebar to play, you should see our character starting to animate and dissolve into these. So yeah, super cool. And if you wanted to like make it look like the Avengers dissolve effect, I don't want to get too deep into that, but essentially what you would have to do is use a set position node in front of your instances, and then you'd want to control the position of these instances using, say, let's add in a random value. Plug the value into the offset, and now you can see it kind of looks like it's dissolving already. And then essentially, once this is complete, right, you would want all these instances to also go away somehow. So you could either mask that out using a delete geometry node, or I believe you could just animate the scale of these so that they just dissolve completely. So to make the Avengers sort of effect, you would make sure that you animate these instances going away from the character like it's blowing in a wind, and then to make sure it dissolves, you would animate the scale of these instances. So to see if it works, actually, I'm just gonna go ahead and set that up, and then we'll come back. So yeah, as I'm playing this back, I set that up and you can see it working out. So to make that happen, briefly, I added a set position node, and then I animated the random value offset minimum value until it kind of looked like it was blowing away. And then I added a random value to the instance on point scale. Then I animated the max value, which was the max scale of those instances, and took them from 1 to 0 throughout the timeline. The one thing that I would probably fix about this, if you're trying to do the Avengers thing, is somehow mask out the scale of these particles so that it's not controlling them all at once, which it is right here. So in other words, your homework would be to find a way to make sure that these particles are at a particular scale when they're peeling off the character, and then they individually start to disintegrate or descale. Because right now, they are all descaling before we even see some of them. Does that make sense? I'm Jordan Needham. This has been Jham 3D. If you learned anything super cool using this tutorial or made anything really cool, please share your work with me at jham.3d on Instagram. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything else you want to learn about geometry nodes. I do have a video which shows you how to use geometry nodes as a quick possible alternative to cloth and fluid sims. So go ahead and check that out. I will catch you next time.